Gunfire shattered the stained glass windows of St. Andrew's Chapel, raining colorful shrapnel over the panicked wedding guests. Amidst the chaos, as men in tailored suits drew concealed weapons, Mina stared in horror at the man holding her hand. He wasn't just a quiet student, and she wasn't an orphan. The rain was coming down in sheets across the Los Angeles skyline, turning the sprawling campus of Cortland University into a bleak gray painting. Inside the Whitfield Library, the air was thick with the scent of damp wool coats and stale coffee. Mina Song shifted the heavy textbook in her arms, her eyes scanning the crowded study hall. Every wooden table was packed with desperate students cramming for midterms. She was 21 years old, a nursing major, surviving on a mountain of student loans, and exhausted down to her bones. Her mother, Grace, had passed away 8 months prior, leaving Mina entirely alone in the world. In the far corner, tucked away behind a row of towering oak bookshelves, sat a solitary figure. Daniel Cho didn't look like a typical college student. At 23, he possessed a quiet, dangerous stillness that made people instinctively give him a wide berth. He wore a dark tailored overcoat, and his dark eyes were fixed not on the open laptop in front of him, but on the reflections in the tall glass windows. Daniel was a bagman and a low-level enforcer for the Bake Organization, a brutal crime syndicate currently fighting a turf war over the shipping lanes of the Long Beach port. He was enrolled in classes solely as a front, a way to launder his time and explain his presence in the city while the heat died down from a warehouse bust in Gardena. Mina approached his table, her knuckles white as she gripped her nursing textbook. "Can I sit here?" she whispered. Daniel's gaze snapped from the window to her face. He took in her damp, dark hair, the shadows of exhaustion under her bright brown eyes, and the oversized cardigan that looked like it belonged in a thrift store. He gave a single curt nod and gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Thanks," Mina breathed, practically collapsing into the seat. "It's a madhouse in here today." "Midterms," Daniel replied, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He didn't look at her, his eyes drifting back to the perimeter of the room. That was when Daniel saw them. 2 men were standing near the reference section. They were in their late 40s, wearing expensive dark overcoats that failed to hide the thick, muscular builds of men who made their living with their hands. Daniel's heart skipped a fraction of a beat. He recognized the man on the left, Sam Ahn, a known ruthless enforcer and trusted lieutenant for Joseph Kwon, the undisputed boss of the Koreatown outfit and the Bake Organization's sworn enemy. Daniel instinctively tensed his hand, drifting beneath his coat toward the cold steel of the pistol tucked into his waistband. Had the Kwons found him? Was this a hit? But Ahn wasn't looking at Daniel. He was looking at the girl. "I'm Mina, by the way," she said, pulling a highlighter from her bag, completely oblivious to the apex predators standing 50 feet away. Daniel slowly moved his hand away from his weapon. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," Mina noted with a small, weary smile. "Don't worry, I won't talk your ear off. I just need to memorize the cardiovascular system before my brain melts." Daniel studied her. She was completely unguarded. He watched as Ahn subtly shifted his position to keep Mina in his line of sight while the second man checked the fire exit. They weren't hunting, they were guarding. "You from the city?" Daniel asked carefully, keeping his tone casual. "Born and raised," Mina said, highlighting a block of text. "Just me and my mom. She was a nurse at Good Samaritan. Passed away last year. Never knew my dad. Mom said he was a traveling salesman who died in a car wreck before I was born." Typical sob story, right? Daniel's mind raced, piecing together fragments of Underworld lore. 20 years ago, Joseph Kwon survived an assassination attempt outside a local hospital. Rumor had it a civilian nurse saved his life. And for a brief, reckless period, the ruthless crime boss had fallen in love. The streets whispered that Kwon had a daughter, a ghost kept entirely separated from his empire of extortion and violence, protected by an invisible wall of his best men. Daniel looked at the struggling, exhausted college student sitting across from him. She was stressing over textbook prices and anatomy exams, completely unaware that her biological father controlled half the city council, including Councilman Robert Ellis, and possessed a net worth in the hundreds of millions. Mina Song was Joseph Kwon's daughter. "I'm sorry about your mom," Daniel said softly, the weight of his discovery settling heavily on his shoulders. "It's okay," Mina smiled, a genuine warm expression that made Daniel's chest tighten in a way he wasn't accustomed to. I'm surviving. Daniel glanced back at Sam, who was now glaring daggers at him from across the room. If only you knew, Daniel thought. You're sitting with the enemy. 3 weeks vanished in a blur of shared coffees, late-night study sessions, and quiet conversations along the pier. Despite his better judgment, Daniel found himself hopelessly drawn to Mina. She was everything his world wasn't: kind, transparent, and entirely innocent. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt a desperate urge to walk away from the Bake organization, to disappear into a normal life, where his biggest worry was an anatomy exam rather than a grand jury indictment. But the syndicate does not let its soldiers simply walk away. On a cold Thursday evening, Daniel was summoned to a produce warehouse in the Vernon Industrial District. The air inside smelled sharply of rotting crates and cigarette smoke. In the back office, flanked by stacked pallets, sat Victor Bake. Victor was a deeply unhinged man who inherited his power through fear rather than respect. "Sit down, Daniel," Victor barked, tapping a thick manila folder on the metal desk. "We got a break, a big one." Daniel sat, keeping his expression neutral. "What kind of break, boss?" "Detective Marsh finally earned his bribe," Victor sneered, revealing a mouth of crooked, stained teeth. He pulled out sealed medical records. "We found Quan's ghost. The bastard has a daughter. A legitimate biological daughter. She's been hiding in plain sight." Daniel's blood ran ice cold. He kept his hands resting casually on his knees, though his knuckles ached with the effort to keep from shaking. "Is that right?" Victor flipped the folder open and tossed a glossy surveillance photograph across the desk. It was a picture of Mina walking out of the campus library, and in the blurred background standing near the doors was Daniel. "We got eyes on her," Victor said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "And look at this. You're already in place. I knew you were a smart kid, Daniel. Taking classes, doing recon on the enemy's bloodline. Brilliant." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. "She doesn't know who she is, Victor. She thinks her dad was a salesman." "Who gives a damn what she thinks?" Victor laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Con cares. That's what matters. We snatch her tomorrow night. We take her down to the shipping containers at the port, and we call Quan. We tell him he signs over the distribution routes, or we send his little girl back to him in pieces." "Tomorrow?" Daniel asked, his voice hollow. "Yeah. Arn's detail is light on Friday nights. Just him and one other guy. You get close to her, isolate her. We roll up, put 2 in Arn's head, and throw her in the van. You do this right, Daniel? And you're a made man." Daniel left the warehouse feeling as though he were suffocating. The cold wind whipping off the coast did nothing to clear the panic rising in his chest. If the Bakes took Mina, it would trigger a war that would turn the streets of Los Angeles into a river of blood. And Mina, sweet innocent Mina, who worried about paying her heating bill, would be collateral damage. He had to get to her. Daniel found her walking near the Santa Monica Pier, wrapped in her oversized coat, clutching a cup of hot cider. The pier was relatively deserted, the winter chill keeping the tourists away. "Daniel," she called out, her face lighting up as she saw him approaching. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Mina," Daniel said, grabbing her by the shoulders. His intensity wiped the smile from her face. "We need to leave right now." "What?" "Why? You're hurting me." "I'm sorry," he muttered, loosening his grip, but keeping a firm hold on her arm as he scanned the perimeter. 50 yards back, he spotted Sam leaning against a light post, smoking a cigarette. Quan's guard dog was on duty. "Daniel, you're scaring me," Mina said, pulling back slightly. "What is going on lately? I feel like I'm going crazy. I keep seeing the same men everywhere I go. Those guys from the library. I swear one of them is following me." "You aren't crazy," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly. "Mina, there is a lot about your life, about your family, that you don't know." Before he could explain, a black SUV rounded the corner at the end of the pier, its headlights off. It accelerated aggressively, the heavy tires chewing up the pavement as it hurtled directly toward them. Victor Bake hadn't waited for Friday. He was making his move right now. "Get down," Daniel roared. The side doors of the SUV slid open before the vehicle even came to a complete halt, revealing 3 men in ski masks armed with suppressed submachine guns. At the exact same moment, Sam dropped his cigarette, reaching into his coat and drawing a massive revolver, sprinting toward them with shocking speed for a man his size. Mina screamed as the first suppressed shots cut through the freezing air, shattering the glass of a nearby ticket booth. Daniel threw his arms around her, tackling the daughter of the crime boss to the icy concrete as the two deadliest syndicates in Los Angeles opened fire. The frozen concrete of the pier erupted into a chaotic symphony of shattered glass and high-velocity lead. Daniel pinned Mina behind the thick steel base of a decorative lamppost as a hail of bullets tore through the ticket booth they had just been. Standing near, Mina pressed her hands over her ears, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, expecting to die on the freezing pavement, her nursing textbooks scattered uselessly nearby. 50 yards away, Sam Ahn proved exactly why Joseph Kwon paid him so well. The aging enforcer didn't dive for cover. He advanced, moving with a terrifying calculated precision that defied his heavy build. Ahn raised his revolver. The hand cannon roared, deafening in the winter silence. The first shot took the driver of the SUV through the windshield. The heavy vehicle swerved violently, crashing into a concrete barricade. "Stay down," Daniel commanded, his voice devoid of its usual quiet calm. It was a bark of pure tactical authority. Before his life as a bagman for the Bakes, Daniel had spent 4 years as a Marine infantryman overseas, a past he kept hidden from the syndicate. Now muscle memory took over. He drew his concealed pistol, rising just enough to acquire a target. One of the masked Bake gunmen was stepping out of the crashed SUV, raising an automatic weapon toward Ahn's exposed flank. Daniel fired twice. The double tap was flawless, catching the gunman in the chest and dropping him to the ground. Ahn snapped his head toward Daniel, his eyes widening in shock as he realized the college kid he had been glaring at in the library was a trained shooter returning fire on Bake soldiers. But there was no time to question it. The remaining 2 gunmen laid down a heavy barrage of suppressing fire, forcing Ahn to duck behind a concrete planter. A bullet clipped the planter, sending a jagged chunk of stone flying into Ahn's shoulder. The big man grunted, dropping his revolver as he clutched his collarbone, blood instantly blooming through his expensive coat. "Ahn is hit," Daniel yelled over the gunfire. He grabbed Mina's shoulder, forcing her to look at him. "Mina, listen to me. When I start shooting, you run to that planter and you drag him behind it. You're a nurse. Keep him from bleeding out." "I can't. I don't know who that is," she sobbed, terror paralyzing her limbs. "He's your father's man, and he's the only reason we aren't dead," Daniel roared, stripping away the last veil of his cover. "Go." "Dude." Daniel stepped out from the lamppost, exposing himself to the shooters. He fired methodically, laying down suppressing fire that forced the Bake gunmen to duck behind the ruined chassis of the SUV. Driven by pure adrenaline, Mina scrambled across the ice. She slid into the cover of the planter just as Ahn slumped against it, his face pale. The street-hardened killer looked at the terrified 21-year-old girl with a mixture of awe and panic. "Miss Kwon," Ahn wheezed, his breathing shallow. "Get back. Get out of the line of fire." "Shut up and hold still," Mina snapped, a sudden fierce survival instinct kicking in. She ripped off her thick woolen scarf, balled it up, and pressed it brutally hard against the wound near his collarbone. Ahn hissed in pain but nodded in grim respect. Daniel dropped the empty magazine from his pistol, slamming a fresh one home. "They're falling back," he shouted. The wail of LAPD sirens echoed in the distance, bouncing off the buildings downtown. The remaining Bake men, knowing the police response time in this district was less than 3 minutes, abandoned their dead and sprinted toward a secondary getaway car parked near the loading docks. Daniel ran to the planter, grabbing Ahn by his uninjured arm. "Can you walk?" "My SUV, black Suburban, 50 feet north," Ahn grunted, tossing Daniel the keys with a blood-slicked hand. They practically carried the heavy man to the armored vehicle. Daniel threw Ahn into the back seat while Mina scrambled in beside him, keeping the pressure on his wound. Daniel jumped into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. He slammed it into reverse, spun the wheel, and tore out of the pier parking lot, merging recklessly onto the freeway just as the first squad cars arrived on the scene above. The underground stretch of tunnel beneath downtown was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium lights. The tires squealed as Daniel navigated the subterranean streets, checking his rearview mirror every 5 seconds to ensure they weren't being followed. In the back seat, the silence was suffocating, broken only by Arn's ragged breathing and the hum of the SUV's heater. Mina's hands were covered in blood. She stared at the back of Daniel's head, the pieces of the puzzle violently snapping together in her mind. "Miss Kwon," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She looked down at Arn. "Who is my father?" Arn closed his eyes, leaning his head against the tinted window. "Joseph Kwon, head of the Koreatown outfit. Your mother. She made him swear to keep you out of the life. She wanted you to be normal. He bought half the city council, including Councilman Ellis, just to keep your birth record sealed. I've been watching you since you were in kindergarten, kid." Mina felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Her entire life, the student loans, the struggling to pay rent, the quiet grief of her mother's funeral. It was all a curated existence. She was heir to an empire of extortion and violence. She slowly looked up at the rearview mirror, meeting Daniel's dark eyes. "And you? Were you watching me since kindergarten too?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles cracked. "No, I work for the Bake organization. I'm a bagman. Victor Bake found out you existed through a dirty cop. I was supposed to get close to you, find your vulnerabilities. Bake was coming tonight to kidnap you. He wanted to use you as leverage to strip your father of his ports." Mina recoiled as if she had been struck. The quiet, solitary boy from the library, the one who had brought her coffee and listened to her complain about anatomy exams, was a spy. He was an operative for a rival syndicate. "You lied to me," she breathed, tears of absolute betrayal cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "I did," Daniel admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I didn't let them take you. I just threw my life away to protect you, Mina. The Bakes will butcher me for what I just did on that pier. But I couldn't let them hurt you." "Pull over," Mina ordered, her voice trembling but finding a sudden icy core. "Mina, we aren't safe." "I said pull over." Daniel slammed on the brakes, pulling the heavy SUV into an abandoned loading bay beneath the financial district. He turned in his seat, expecting her to run. Instead, Mina didn't move. She looked at the blood on her hands, the blood of her father's enforcer, a man who had just taken a bullet for her. The innocence she had woken up with that morning was dead, shattered on the ice of the pier. She thought of her mother, who had lied every day of her life to keep her safe, only for that safety to be an illusion. She wasn't Mina Song, the struggling nursing student, anymore. She was a Kwon, and she was being hunted. She looked at Daniel, her brown eyes hardening into something resembling polished steel. "You know how Bake operates? You know his routes, his safe houses, his men?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I know everything." "Good," Mina said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Take us to my father." The Kwon estate in Bel Air was a sprawling stone compound hidden behind iron gates and ancient oak trees. When Daniel pulled the bullet-riddled Suburban up to the guardhouse, a dozen heavily armed men surrounded the vehicle in seconds. 10 minutes later, Mina stood in the center of a mahogany-paneled study that smelled of expensive scotch and old leather. Joseph Kwon sat behind a massive desk. He was a man in his late 50s, his hair silver at the temples, radiating an aura of absolute, undisputed power. Yet as he looked at Mina, his ruthless facade crumbled. He saw the ghost of the nurse he had loved 2 decades ago. He saw his ultimate failure. "Mina," Joseph rasped, standing up slowly. "Don't," Mina said, holding up a blood-stained hand. The gesture was so commanding that the crime boss actually stopped in his tracks. "My mother is dead. You left us alone to pretend I was safe, and tonight I was almost kidnapped and murdered by a man named Victor Bake. The illusion is over." Joseph's eyes flared with a lethal paternal rage. He glared at Daniel, who stood by the door, flanked by 4 armed guards. "And this piece of filth? Arn tells me he's a Bake boy. Why is he breathing in my house?" "Because he saved my life," Mina stated, stepping between her father and Daniel. "And because we are going to use him to end the Bake organization tonight." Joseph narrowed his eyes, assessing the young woman standing before him. The terrified college girl had been burned away in the crossfire. In her place stood a woman who possessed his blood, his intellect, and a terrifyingly calm understanding of leverage. "Victor Bake operates out of a produce warehouse in Vernon," Daniel spoke up, his voice steady despite the guns pointed at his back. "But he doesn't sleep there. He sleeps at a penthouse overlooking downtown. He uses an underground private garage. If you hit him at the warehouse, it's a fortress. But I know his transit schedule. I know exactly when he moves. I don't trust a rat, Joseph spat. You don't have to trust him, Mina said, stepping forward, leaning her hands on her father's desk. You have to trust me. Bake wants me. He thinks I'm a soft target, a civilian who doesn't know the rules of the game, so we give him exactly what he wants. Joseph's face went pale. Absolutely not. I am not putting you in the crosshairs again. I am already in the crosshairs, Mina fired back, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Bake won't stop. If he doesn't get me today, he'll try next week or next month. The only way to remove the target from my back is to remove the man who painted it there. We set a trap. For the next 2 hours, the study turned into a war room. Mina, utilizing a brilliant methodical logic honed by years of intense academic study, helped her father and his captains map out the strategy. Daniel provided the tactical intelligence detailing the exact blind spots in Bake's security detail and the layout of his transit routes. It was a staggering reversal. The bagman and the nursing student were orchestrating the downfall of Los Angeles' second largest crime syndicate. At 3 in the morning, the plan went into motion. Mina, wearing a vest beneath a designer trench coat provided by her father's people, sat in the back of a decoy town car. Daniel was in the front passenger seat, a loaded rifle resting across his lap. They parked in a desolate alleyway near the warehouse district, fully exposed. Daniel dialed a burner phone. He called Victor Bake's private line. Daniel, you son of a... Victor's voice hissed through the speaker. You have 30 seconds to explain why my men are dead and you aren't. I have the girl, Victor, Daniel lied smoothly, his voice laced with manufactured panic. Arn went crazy, started shooting everything. I managed to grab her in the chaos. I'm 3 blocks from the plant, pinned down in an alley. Quan's guys are sweeping the grid. I need an extraction now or we both lose her. There was a heavy pause on the line. Greed overrode Victor Bake's paranoia. Keep her head down. I'm coming out myself with the heavy hitters. The line went dead. Mina looked at Daniel, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. He bought it. He bought it, Daniel confirmed, racking the charging handle of his rifle. He looked back at her, his eyes softening. Whatever happens next, Mina, I'm sorry for how we met, but I am not sorry that I met you. Mina reached forward, her hand finding his shoulder, gripping it tightly. We finished this together. Minutes later, a convoy of 4 black SUVs roared out of the subterranean garage of the warehouse. Victor Bake, eager to secure his prize, led the charge. But as the convoy turned onto the deserted street leading to the alley, the trap snapped shut. The garbage truck, driven by one of Quan's men, aggressively reversed out of a side street, violently T-boning the lead SUV and blocking the narrow road before Bake's men could even unbuckle their seatbelts. Joseph Quan's tactical teams, positioned on the rooftops and fire escapes above, opened fire. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Mina watched through the tinted windows of the town car as the empire that had hunted her was dismantled in under 3 minutes of concentrated, devastating crossfire. When the smoke finally cleared and the agonizing silence returned to the freezing Los Angeles night, Joseph himself walked over to the wreckage of Bake's vehicle to ensure the job was done. The war was over before the city even woke up. A week later, Mina stood on the balcony of a luxury high-rise overlooking the shimmering expanse of the Pacific. She wore a tailored black suit, her hair pulled back sharply. She was no longer cramming for exams in the Whitfield Library. She had deferred her semester. The nursing textbooks were packed away in boxes. She turned as the glass door slid open. Daniel stepped out onto the balcony. He wore a sharp, dark suit that matched hers, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer had to hide in the shadows. He had been officially brought into the Quan family, answering only to her. Your father called, Daniel said, standing beside her, looking out at the city skyline. Councilman Ellis signed off on the port zoning changes. The Bake territories are fully absorbed. You have complete control of the logistics division. Good, Mina murmured, taking a sip from a crystal glass. She looked at the man who had lied to her, saved her, and ultimately helped her claim her throne. And the library, bought and paid for in cash? Daniel smirked. Endowed in your mother's name. No one will ever touch it. Mina smiled, a genuine warm expression that hadn't entirely vanished, just hardened into something unbreakable. She reached out, her fingers lacing through Daniel's. She wasn't just the crime boss's daughter anymore. She was the heir apparent. And in the ruthless underworld of Los Angeles, she finally had someone she could sit with. End.